When I was in the fifth grade, I read a column in my local newspaper that made me really angry. The author used stereotypes about women going to the bathroom in groups and carrying handbags as a way to score cheap humor points. I was not amused. I was outraged. When I told my mom about this, she explained to me what people do when they're upset about something that they see published in a newspaper. They write a letter to the editor. So I wrote my rage into a letter saying, among other things, I read the Messenger to find out what's going on locally and to find out local opinions, not to read about stereotypes. I find it disgusting. And concerned that people wouldn't believe I'd written it myself, I added a PS. I am 10 and a half years old and I am homeschooled, and my mom did not help me with this, but she made me copy it 4 times. I have always written most passionately and enthusiastically about things I'm mad about. When I get fired up, the words start flowing. My letter to the editor writing campaign would continue on various topics until college, when I started writing blog posts, and then would continue to evolve into impassioned Facebook posts. Why, yes, I am a proud millennial. It's true. These days, as a student working towards my Master of Divinity degree at Meadville Lombard Theological School, it's no surprise that when I get fired up about things, they get written into sermons. Sexism still makes me mad, but that's a topic for another day, maybe another sermon. One of the most important things I've been forced to do in seminary is self-reflection. And as part of what I've learned, it's that my absolute most loathed emotion to experience is embarrassment. I don't enjoy feeling guilty or feeling ashamed, but embarrassment takes the cake for me. Embarrassment differs from shame in that it has an audience. You might be the only person who knows what you're ashamed of, but when something shameful happens in public, it's embarrassing. Kids these days often refer to embarrassing things as cringe or cringy, stuff that makes you go, yikes. Often, cringe moments or experiences center around a shared cultural experience, and they're only amusing when they're about something trivial rather than something serious. As I'm sure most of us recall, being a teen or a preteen is basically one long, drawn-out, full-on cringe season of life. Your parents are embarrassing. You constantly embarrass yourself, whether or not you realize it while it's happening, or whether you look back years later and cringe while reading the pro-con list you wrote about whether you should hold hands with the person you had a crush on. Hypothetically, that could happen to someone. So it's no wonder that young people on TikTok are quick to designate things as cringe in order to feel better about their own embarrassing moments. Earlier this morning, we heard part of Brené Brown's work around shame and vulnerability. I too am a big Harry Potter fan, much like Brené. And while I believe that Brené Brown is a modern day prophet, reading a lot of her work is absolutely cringy for me. Why? Well, in an article in Psychology Today, Dr. Neil Burton writes, whereas embarrassment is a response to something that threatens our projected image but is otherwise morally neutral, shame is a response to something that is morally wrong or reprehensible. Shame is normally accentuated if its object is exposed, but unlike embarrassment, also attaches to a thought or action that remains undisclosed and undiscoverable to others. Embarrassment can be intense, but shame is a more substantial feeling in that it pertains to our moral character and not merely to our social character or image. Perhaps it's because of my Enneagram type or just my personality generally, but I've learned that my personal reaction to embarrassment is much more powerful than my reaction to guilt or shame. And that makes me wonder if this is a thing for Unitarian Universalists generally. Because we don't have a dogmatic belief system that centers around personal redemption from sin or shame, are we as a denomination more susceptible to the public shame of embarrassment than we are to private feelings of shame? I think it's something uncomfortable that we should consider. Brené's work is very powerful for so many people because it centers around the need for vulnerability in creating human connection. So many of us are afraid of sharing our soft, vulnerable, shame-filled sides that we never examine or confront those feelings. I know that I personally would love to ignore my negative emotions all day, forever and ever, the end. But Brown writes, shame resilience is key to embracing our vulnerability. We can't let ourselves be seen if we're terrified by what people might think. Often, not being good at vulnerability means that we're damn good at shame. While shame and embarrassment might differ based on audience, the need to build up our resilience around both of them is the same. That quote comes from Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, the title of which comes from one of my all-time favorite quotations, a quote from President Theodore Roosevelt. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that this place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. Fear of being embarrassed holds so many people back. When you're in school, you might be too scared to raise your hand in class. What if you get the answer wrong? It might hold you back from trying out for the high school musical. What if you sound terrible when you sing in front of people? As an adult, you might avoid speaking up at a work meeting. What if people think your idea is silly? You couldn't possibly apply to that graduate program, put your name on the ballot, start that business. What if you get rejected? What if you lose? What if you fail at something that you love? On top of your own personal disappointment and feelings of failure with those, everyone would know. So it's better to just not. That's safer. That's less dangerous. That's less vulnerable. We protect ourselves from negative emotions by giving into our fear. It protects us from ever stepping foot in the arena. If we aren't in the arena, we can't get hurt, our fear tells us. When I was searching for words of wisdom around embarrassment, I was interested to note that a lot of comedians had something to say about it, which makes complete sense. What is stand-up comedy if not making yourself vulnerable in public? Putting what you've created in public on stage under the lights, waiting for real-time feedback in the form of laughter. That sounds absolutely terrifying for most of us, doesn't it? I mean, how the heck do they do it? Well, comedy giant Tina Fey wrote, "For my first show at SNL, I wrote a Bill Clinton sketch, and during our read-through, it wasn't getting any laughs. This weight of embarrassment came over me, and I felt like I was sweating from my spine out. But I realized, okay, that happened, and I did not die. You've got to experience failure to understand that you can survive it." Tina Fey would not be the massively successful artist and performer that she is if she let that horrendous feeling of sweating from the spine out, which I can totally imagine feeling when I read that. It just, it's a visceral reaction. It sounds terrible. We would not have gotten cultural touchstones like Mean Girls and 30 Rock if Faye hadn't learned to survive the embarrassment of failure. Building up resilience around failure and embarrassment that comes with it is critical to being successful at the thing you want to do. As Winston Churchill famously said, success is not final and failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. And sure, not everybody can be a Tina Fey or a Winston Churchill, but we can all benefit from their wisdom when it comes to tackling things we're afraid to do. Here's something that we, as Unitarian Universalists, are collectively constantly building up our resilience to work on: anti-racist work. One of the best and most important things that I've learned about at Meadville Lombard has been the Jones-Oken framework for understanding white supremacy culture. It's not a checklist for how to identify someone who's racist or a white supremacist, but a way of recognizing traits that our society values culturally that demonstrate a culture of white supremacy in action. This is exactly what we mean when we talk about systemic racism. It's white cultural values being held up as the only standard, the pinnacle, the best way of doing things. Some traits of white supremacy culture include perfectionism and the connected ideas of one right way, objectivity, qualified, and professionalism. Spoiler alert, perfectionism doesn't exist. True perfection is not a real thing. And without perfection, the concepts of objectivity and what it means to be objectively qualified for something can't exist either. I, of course, can only speak to my experience of this framework as a white person. When I learned about this way of understanding our society, it was both challenging and incredibly freeing. It's how I began to understand how even white people are harmed by the culture of white supremacy. Tima Okun, one of the creators of this framework, writes, I have come to understand that some people, when introduced to white supremacy culture as an article and its list of characteristics, respond with anger, thinking that my goal in listing the characteristics is to shame or blame. Sometimes people are angry about being connected to any of these characteristics, feeling that to admit we have perfectionist tendencies or a belief that our way is the right way makes us bad. My intention is to say that white supremacy culture trains us all to internalize attitudes and behaviors that do not serve any of us. A belief that we can be perfect or should be perfect raises the questions, who decides what perfect is? I'm saying that any attempt to be perfect is in fact a fool's errand, not that we are fools, because learning from our mistakes is how we grow and learn and lean into our glorious and flawed humanity. We can never be perfect when perfection is defined by others, particularly by institutions and cultures that do not care for or about us. We are, in fact, already perfect. We were born perfect, no striving necessary. We are strongest when we are allowed to be vulnerable with ourselves and with each other. White supremacy culture does not allow for vulnerability, and that is a tragedy for us all. So some of the characteristics of perfectionism outlined by Dr. Okun include pointing out how a person or work is inadequate, talking to others about the inadequacies of a person or their work without ever talking directly to them. Mistakes are perceived as personal, i.e., they reflect badly on the person who is making those mistakes rather than being seen for what they are, just mistakes. Making a mistake is confused with being a mistake, doing wrong with being wrong. Often, perfectionism is internally felt. In other words, the perfectionist fails to appreciate their own good work, more often pointing out their faults or failures, focusing on inadequacies and mistakes rather than learning from them. The person works with a harsh and constant inner critic. It makes me think of the segment of the reading from Brene Brown where she references Harry Potter, and Harry is asking, am I a bad person because I have bad feelings and bad thoughts? This is a great example of this kind of perfectionist tendency to say that I am bad because I'm feeling something bad. So to me, as a recovering perfectionist, these all sound deeply embarrassing. One of the many problematic ways that I see perfectionism weaponized is by the progressive left, a political movement that I am often a part of. Progressives too often believe in the perfectionist idea that there is one right way, another hallmark of white supremacy culture in action. According to Okun, one right way shows up as the belief that there is one right way to do things, and once people are introduced to the right way, they will see the light and adopt it. When a person or group does not adapt or change to fit the one right way, then those defining or upholding the one right way assume something is wrong with the other, those not changing, not with us. It's similar to a missionary who sees only value in their beliefs about what is good rather than acknowledging value in the culture of the communities they are determined to convert, or to the right way of thinking or the right way of living. I think we can all relate to some of these things. The emphasis on perfection and one right way scares away many people from learning about or participating in anti-racist work. And then it creates alienation for many more who do genuinely want to participate, but who are driven away by the shame and embarrassment that they experience when their imperfection is weaponized against them. In order to do the important life-saving work of anti-racism, white people have to identify and challenge our own deeply internalized cultural norms. And wow, is that uncomfortable? It involves being vulnerable, being willing to feel embarrassment, being willing to fail, being willing to learn new ways of thinking and doing. We must be willing, in spite of the perfectionism in our culture, in spite of our fear of embarrassment, to get into the arena. We must be the people who strive valiantly, who make mistakes, who come up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. We must be the people who do actually strive to do the deeds, so that if we fail, at least we fail while daring greatly, so that our place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. There is no one right way, as much as we would like there to be. But to save lives, to change the world, we must have the courage to weather the storms of embarrassment. And when we do things that are totally cringe, we will make mistakes, but we must dare greatly. We have to build up our vulnerability muscle and our willingness to be uncomfortable, because we, as Unitarian Universalists, are called to side with love and to make this interconnected world of ours one with more peace, more liberty, and more justice for all. So I'd like to close with a prayer for a time of embarrassment. Spirit of life, God of many names, help us to have the courage to do the things we think we cannot do. Help us to have genuinely open minds, open hearts, and a willingness to hear things that make us uncomfortable. Send us people and ideas that will help us grow in our collective and individual search for truth and meaning. Once we have learned what we need to from our embarrassment, help us to not dwell on it. Please send us what and who we need to make this world a better place and to allow all of us to shine our light into the world. Amen and blessed be.